Hello and welcome to the NFL Red Zone Tight End Analysis Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11. Of course, talking about Week 16 and some favorite plays of yours for this week. And we finally have at least most of the tight ends healthy, so all the options are there. We'll get to the guy we're talking about there in a minute. But first off, your favorite play, Julius Thomas. Obviously, it's Jacksonville against New Orleans. They made Matt Stafford look like Tom Brady in the first half, at least last night. I think at one point he was 12 for 13 with 3 touchdown passes. And, I mean, it was just too easy. The defense is just so bad. And I still blame Rob Ryan, but you also got to just realize that this team just doesn't have the defensive talent to compete against good playmakers. And Jacksonville has a ton of them, and Julius Thomas definitely being one of the better ones.
Yeah, and you got to look at Vegas. Going to have this one pretty high for a total. Both sides, I mean, they have one of the two worst defenses in the league, so you got to expect both passing attacks to really thrive. And both to just probably go back and forth on the game here, and Thomas, I mean, has been really solid over the last 8 games or so. 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games, and averaging 7.2 targets per game. So I just think for his price, I mean, he's definitely the easiest option to just plug and play.
Yeah. Does he have a new nickname yet? Because I remember it was Orange Julius with Denver with the orange jersey.
I haven't seen. I'll have to keep an eye out for that.
He should get one. Maybe he hasn't. Maybe he's got to be healthy for a full season in Jacksonville before he earns a nickname. But he's good enough to have a nickname. Someone's got to be a big fan of Julius Thomas. There's got to be a number one Julius Thomas fan on Twitter somewhere. Delaney Walker next up, and you mentioned that touchdown play last week over Patrick Chung, and as someone who's not a big fan of the Patriots anyway, or Patrick Chung in particular, I loved it. Also, having some Delaney Walker didn't hurt, but I mean, this guy is maybe at any position, the best, most consistent NFL player from a fantasy perspective, especially, that no one ever plays. I mean, I think he was 2 to 5% owned most places last week, and all he does every week is score touchdowns and get a ton of targets.
Yeah, I really like Walker. I mean, he's consistent, and although Houston's matchup is really no better than the Patriots was last week, and Walker still delivered. So he has 6 or more catches in 9 of 13 games this season. So that DK full point PPR, you got to love him on that site. And even with Zach Mettenberg under center, I mean, he's still going to get targets. So he sees 24% of the red zone targets and averaging 8 per game. And he just sits at that mid-price range where he just easily slides into your lineup, and you know what you're going to get week in and week out.
Yeah, and the Titans are going to be throwing the ball a lot because they're one of the few teams that still just can't find any sort of consistency in the running game at all, no matter who. I mean, we kind of knew that from day one this year when they didn't even really want Bishop Sankey, and you just knew it was going to be a mess in that backfield. So it's certainly a pass-first attack, which is nice for Walker, being still, Green Beckham's starting to close the gap a little bit, but Walker's still the go-to guy.
Yeah.
Value play, Zach Miller. Of course, the Bears were awful on offense last week. Alshon Jeffrey really the only other target, though, like we kind of had mentioned before with him, with Martellus Bennett out. So Zach Miller, a guy that by default is going to get looks. And Tampa's not a great – they're at the middle of the road at best defense here. And the Bears out of the playoff picture, but guys still got to get paid. You still got to finish the season strong. And you got to imagine a guy like Zach Miller, if he finishes the season really well – maybe you're working towards a nice contract. I don't know if his contract situation's up this year, but I think I'd heard that it's up after this season.
Yeah. So I mean, just 4,000 on DraftKings. He's priced a little higher on FanDuel, but definitely a better value play on DK. And even, I mean, Chicago's offense looked pitiful against Minnesota, so he still had 6 catches for 57 yards, so still a decent line. And just 6 targets again there, and he had 6 targets last week as well. So he's just a safe option. You know what you're going to get from him. He does have upside because he does get looked at in the red zone and has 3 red zone touchdowns on the season. And you figure he's only been really playing with the first team offense for a couple of weeks already. So just a safe value option if you don't want to pay up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good cheap play for you there. Next up, GPP. Of course, you're looking at the guys for the big upside. Rob Gronkowski has that monster upside. And you mentioned he had a big game against the Jets. Obviously, this game means a lot. More so for the Jets. I mean, the Patriots, at worst case, are going to be the number 2 seed now in the AFC. Possible they could lose the 1 seed to, Cincinnati if all goes wrong for them, which very unlikely. But either way, they're kind of locked in, but still enough to play for. Obviously, if you got to play through Gillette Stadium in the playoffs, nobody wants that. Of course, the Patriots do. So they're still going to go out and try to knock their division rivals out of the playoffs. But it was a good game last time, which you imagine the Jets have had enough success on offense, so they should be able to keep this one competitive, which is great news for Gronk because it seems like the few games where he struggles or doesn't put up big numbers, it's because the Patriots just win big.
Yeah. I mean, you got to like Gronk, and especially with the line he put up last time, 11 receptions, 108 yards, and a touchdown. And he saw 16 targets that game. And we talked about James White and the running back one, and we just got to think, I mean, New England's going to throw a ton. I mean, they're just not going to run the ball. They can't really run the ball, and you figure New York's defense really limits the run. So I expect a full force passing attack, and Gronk's upside certainly is unmatched.
Yeah, second to none for sure. And then Greg Olsen, of course, the guy that is the number one volume target for Cam Newton, as we see Ted Ginn all of a sudden is a lock for 2 touchdowns a week, it seems to be. But either way, he's the consistent option. He's the red zone option, although we did see Ted Ginn get a red zone touchdown last week. But that was more because Cam Newton had about 25 minutes in the pocket to throw. And obviously, a guy fast enough as Ted Ginn running back and forth in the red zone or in the end zone, eventually you're going to get open. But Olsen's the guy that gets a lot of volume. He gets looks. And, I mean, he's got huge upside, too. He's had a couple monster games this week, too.
Yeah, really like Olsen. I think people are going to be off him just because you look at the Atlanta game from 2 weeks ago and just had 3 receptions for 52 yards. And there's just a lot of options at tight end this week, so I think he'll go lower owned than he should. And obviously with the way Newton's playing, you figure, if Ted Ginn gives a couple touchdown looks to Olsen, he's going to have some monster upside.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, it's going to be a tough scenario. I mean, opposing defense, who do you try to stop there? For my money, I'd be more worried about Greg Olsen since he's the more actual consistent guy. But tend to think that defenses would rather give up a 20-yard pass across the middle of the field than an 80-yard touchdown. So going to be interesting to see. But Atlanta hasn't done a good job of stopping anyone, as you mentioned. So we could still see both those guys have huge games. Benjamin Watson next up, a guy who he's been quietly really good, at least after the first few weeks of the season this year for Drew Brees and the Saints, where they're still scoring a lot of points, especially at home. And, they got a matchup here against the defense that you mentioned earlier. Neither one of the defenses in this game good. Could see a shootout. Hopefully the Saints don't wait till late in the third quarter, early in the fourth to get it going this week. But certainly potential for big-time upside for him here.
Yeah, I really like him as a contrarian pivot from Julius Thomas there, just because obviously we look at the Saints defense, they've been the worst this season, and they're just plastered in our minds as target against them. But don't forget, Jacksonville hasn't been good either, and Drew Brees is at home. Hopefully he's healthier than he was last night, and Watson has those home and road splits just like Brees does, so you can tell it factors in because he averages 7 more fantasy points at home than on the road, and he has 40 targets in the last 4 weeks, so he's averaging 10 a game, and you just got to like his upside in what should be a shootout.
Yeah, I mean, that's borderline wide receiver 1 territory for those targets. I mean, obviously taking out guys like Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, but, a fringe number 1, I mean, 10 targets a week is monstrous.
Yeah.
So, got to like that. That'll wrap things up here for us for Week 16. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all of our other content at dailyfantasycafe.com.